All right, let's jump into another deep dive.
Always fun.
Yeah, and this time we're going back to February 2016.
Oh, wow, 2016.
You know, the U.S. presidential election was really starting to heat up then.
Uh-huh.
Plus, we've got tech giants clashing with the government and the media. Well, let's just say things were getting interesting.
Definitely a pivotal year.
Yeah, and you, dear listener, you sent us a bunch of documents from that month. It's like a time capsule.
I love that. A time capsule.
We're talking primary sources here. Declassified CIA files, internal memos, you name it.
So we're going behind the scenes.
Exactly. Getting a peek into how things really worked back then. Like some real insider baseball. Ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, first up, one of the biggest stories that month. Apple versus the FBI.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. It was huge.
Remember, Apple refused to unlock the iPhone of one of the San Bernardino attackers?
Right, the FBI wanted access, but Apple said no way.
It was a massive showdown. Apple argued that creating a backdoor for the FBI would put every iPhone user at risk.
Yeah, they basically said it would compromise everyone's security.
But the FBI, they claimed it was crucial for national security to have that access.
It was a classic privacy versus security debate. And we're still having that conversation today, aren't we?
Absolutely. This case set a huge precedent. Makes you think, what if Apple had given in back then? Would our digital lives be totally different?
Oh, for sure. It's hard to even imagine.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the election. Specifically, Bernie Sanders.
Okay.
We found this piece by Bill O'Reilly, the Bill O'Reilly writing for the Campaign for America's Future.
Interesting.
And get this. He suggested Bernie could still have a ton of influence at the Democratic convention, even if he didn't win the nomination.
Even if he lost?
Yeah, because of how delegates are allocated. O'Reilly even called the democratic system socialist.
Whoa. That's a pretty loaded term, especially in an election year.
I know, right? But honestly, the whole delegate thing kind of confuses me. Can you break it down, like, in simple terms?
Yeah, sure. So the Democrats use a proportional system, not winner take all.
Okay.
Basically, delegates are awarded based on the percentage of votes each candidate gets.
So even if you don't win a state?
Right. You could still pick up delegates. Think of it like a pie. Everyone gets a slice based on their votes, not just the winner.
Oh, that makes so much more sense. So Sanders could still have a lot of leverage even if he wasn't the nominee.
Yeah, exactly. He could push his agenda at the convention and try to shake Clinton's platform.
Fascinating stuff. And while all this was happening on the Democratic side, Donald Trump was, well, being Donald Trump over on the Republican side.
Yeah, he was definitely shaking things up.
Even President Obama weighed in, saying he didn't think Trump would actually win.
Interesting.
Obama seemed pretty confident that Americans understood how serious the presidency is,
Yeah, I remember that. There was a big contrast between Obama's calm demeanor and the, how I put it, the more, shall we say, fiery rhetoric of the Republican primaries.
It was a clash of styles, that's for sure. And it made a lot of people wonder, is America ready for a celebrity president?
A good question, and one that was on a lot of people's minds at the time.
It's kind of funny, though. Obama seemed so unfazed by all the chaos.
Yeah, like he had faith that it would all work out.
Right, but was that real faith or just, political strategy? We may never know.
That's a good question.
But let's not forget, there was a ton of stuff happening behind the scenes, too. Like at the RNC, the Republican National Committee.
Oh, yeah.
We actually have a memo here from Sean Caracross, the COO. He was addressing concerns about how debate tickets were being given out.
Oh, interesting.
It's actually pretty detailed, laying out exactly how tickets were divided between campaigns, officials, the media, even the RNC itself.
Sounds like they were trying to be super transparent.
Yeah, they were definitely worried about looking unfair, especially with the media watching so closely.
It's like that Apple versus FBI situation. Optics matter in politics, just like in tech.
Totally. Speaking of things changing rapidly, we have to talk about BuzzFeed.
BuzzFeed, I remember those days.
I know, right? Cat videos and quizzes galore. But honestly, they were becoming a major media force.
They were, weren't they?
Yeah, we have this Fast Company article profiling Jonah Peretti, the founder. It really captures their crazy rise.
It was meteoric. They came out of nowhere.
They embraced social media, experimented with new content, and really challenged the old way of doing things.
Totally. They were pioneers in a lot of ways.
And they were early adopters of using algorithms to figure out what people wanted to read.
Yeah, they knew how to go viral before going viral was even a thing.
It's wild. Like an algorithm figured out that people like to cry over cat videos.
Huh. It's true, though. They understood what made content shareable. That's a powerful thing.
And in a way, they were shaking how we consume news today, even if we didn't realize it at the time.
Absolutely. They were blurring the lines between entertainment and information, which is something we see everywhere now.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing when you think about it. And speaking of influential figures, we also have this Vogue magazine profile of Hillary Clinton.
Oh, Vogue. That's interesting.
Yeah, they didn't just focus on her policies, they really tried to capture her personality.
I'm curious to see how they portrayed her.
Well, they talked about her strength, her presence, how she carried herself.
Fashion and politics, especially for women, are always interesting to see intersect.
Right. And there's this quote from her where she says, "I am, at the very least, your equal. I am also probably the most powerful person here." Powerful words indeed.
Wow, that's a statement. You could definitely feel the authority in that.
It's a reminder that for women in politics, even back then, there was this constant need to assert themselves.
For sure. And it makes you wonder, would a male candidate be described in the same way, focusing on their body language and fashion?
That's a good point. It seems like even subtle things like fashion can have a big impact in the political arena.
No doubt about it.
This is fascinating stuff, and we've barely scratched the surface. There's so much more to uncover in these documents.
I'm ready for more. What else do we have?
So we've talked about Apple, Bernie, the FBI, even BuzzFeed. But what about the overall mood of the country back then? Like, was everyone freaking out about the election the way people are today?
Well, it's interesting. We found this USA Today article. They did a poll with Suffolk University. And the results are pretty telling.
Oh.
Yeah, a lot of likely voters, a significant portion, actually said they would be scared if either Trump or Clinton won their party's nomination.
Scared. Wow. That's intense.
Right. I mean, it really shows you the level of anxiety, the polarization that was already bubbling up.
Yeah, definitely. So it wasn't just about policy differences. There was this underlying fear, too.
Exactly. Elections are emotional. They tap into our hopes, fears, anxieties about the future. And in 2016, fear seems to have been a big factor.
It makes you wonder, would things have turned out differently if people had been more, I don't know, hopeful, less afraid?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Historians will probably debate that for years.
Probably so, but let's not forget there were other candidates in the race too, like John Kasich.
Oh yeah, Kasich, he was trying to position himself as the moderate Republican, the alternative to Trump.
Yeah, we have a little blurb from Reuters here. It mentions Kasich hired Trent Duffy, a former press aide for President George W. Bush.
Interesting. Bringing on someone like Duffy with that kind of experience. It's a strategic move for sure.
Yeah, it makes it seem like Kasich was getting serious about trying to broaden his appeal, like maybe attract voters who weren't into the more extreme rhetoric.
Absolutely. Campaign staffing is never random. It tells you something about the candidate's strategy, who they're trying to reach.
Right, crafting the right message. Speaking of strategy, we also have this Politico piece about Ted Cruz, specifically his supporters in the House of Representatives.
Ah, yes. Cruz had this small but very vocal group of House conservatives backing him.
Even though he was facing pushback from a lot of his Senate colleagues.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how that works. The House and Senate, even within the same party, can have these different dynamics.
It shows you the importance of building those coalitions, even when you might not have the full support of the party establishment.
Right. Grassroots support can be powerful.
It's all about those connections, isn't it? Which reminds me, did you know Bernie Sanders' brother, Larry, was a Green Party activist?
Oh, yeah. I read about that. He was living in Oxford, England at the time.
Can you imagine these two brothers on opposite sides of the Atlantic, both super involved in politics, but with very different approaches?
It's fascinating. The Associated Press even mentioned Larry was appointed his party's national spokesperson on health. And this was while his brother was running for president in the U.S.
That's wild. I guess politics really is a family affair sometimes. And it just goes to show personal beliefs can span continents.
Absolutely. And on a larger scale, it highlights how much American politics can impact the rest of the world. Like, what happens here can resonate globally.
Yeah, it's like we're seeing the early stages of a global political shift, something that would keep unfolding in the years to come.
You got it. And the more we dig into these documents, the more connections and complexities we find. It's really quite amazing.
Okay, we're back for the final stretch of our 2016 deep dive. But before we get too serious, can we just take a moment to appreciate, peak BuzzFeed?
Oh, absolutely. It was the golden age of listicles and those irresistible cat videos.
I know, right? It seems kind of silly now, but all that stuff was actually a big part of how media was changing. Like, it influenced how we got our information, maybe even how we thought about things.
It's true. What seems like fluff or just entertainment can actually tell us a lot about what's going on in a culture. It all connects somehow.
Totally. And speaking of things that seemed random at the time but became, iconic later, you remember those photos of a young Bernie Sanders that went viral?
Oh, yeah. Who knew they'd still be popping up everywhere years later?
It's crazy. I guess it just goes to show how powerful nostalgia can be and how our view of the past can change based on what's happening now.
For sure. And it shows how the internet can dig up these hidden gems and turn them into something everyone knows.
Speaking of cultural moments, there's a mention here of John Oliver. He was doing stand-up at the Kennedy Center.
Wow, that's quite a leap. From British comedian to HBO star performing at a prestigious venue like that?
It's kind of blurring the lines, between entertainment, news, and political commentary.
Yeah, Oliver really tapped into something. People wanted to be informed, but they also wanted to be entertained.
It's like comedians can sometimes say things and make us think about things in a way that regular journalists can't.
They can cut through the BS, make us laugh, but also challenge our assumptions.
It's a powerful combination, but let's not forget politics can be pretty serious business too.
Right.
We came across this website, TrumpWinsYouLose.com. It was launched to expose Trump's ties to, well, the gambling world.
So using information, maybe even selectively, to sway public opinion, it definitely raises some questions about transparency and the role of money in all of this.
And it shows how important online platforms were becoming, even back then. Like, they were battlegrounds for controlling the narrative.
This was the early days of online campaigning, right?
Yeah. For better or worse, it changed everything.
No doubt. Speaking of the power of online platforms, there's this article about GoFundMe. They were already killing it back then, raising money for all sorts of causes.
It's incredible. I think they had already hit something like $2 billion raised by that point.
Wow.
They even highlight this campaign to get clean water to Flint, Michigan. They were dealing with a major crisis there.
Right. It's amazing how online crowdfunding can give people a way to tackle these huge problems, especially when traditional institutions aren't doing enough.
It's really inspiring to see people coming together online to make a difference, even when everything else feels chaotic.
It's a reminder that even during tough times, people still want to help each other build a better world.
Okay, so as we wrap up our trip back to February 2016, what are your biggest takeaways?
I think what stands out to me is how much this 1 month foreshadowed so many things that would become huge later on. The political shifts, the technology, it's all there.
From social media taking over, to people losing trust in institutions, to society becoming more and more divided. It's like the seeds were planted back then.
Yeah. And I think a really key takeaway is the power of perspective. Looking back with what we know now, we can see how all these seemingly random things were connected, how they shaped the world we live in today.
It makes you wonder, what will people say about our time, years from now? What will they see as the big turning points, the things that changed everything?
That's a great question. And I think it reminds us to stay informed, be critical thinkers, and remember that even small events can have a ripple effect that lasts way longer than anyone expects.
Well said. A huge thank you to you for joining us on this deep dive into February 2016. And to you, dear listener, we hope this has sparked your curiosity. Keep exploring those connections between the past, present, and future. It's a fascinating journey.